No one allowed anyone to sit beside the alien girl. So I gave her my place without a word. The spaceport was alive with the usual hustle and bustle. Travelers hurried to and fro, merchants shouted out their offers, and the air buzzed with the sounds of engines coming in and going out. Ships from every corner of the galaxy came and went, each one bringing in passengers from different planets, species, and cultures. The massive terminal was filled with strange-looking aliens, humans, and creatures that seemed to be made entirely of light. The spaceport was always crowded, and it was easy to get lost in the sea of unfamiliar faces. But today, something was different. There was a quiet energy in the air. People's footsteps slowed as they passed a particular spot in the terminal. Conversations hushed when they reached that part of the room. No one dared to speak too loudly, and even the children seemed to be quieter than usual. All eyes were drawn to the same place, an empty bench near the center of the terminal. Sitting there all alone was an alien girl. She didn't seem out of place, but at the same time she was impossible to ignore. Her presence seemed to command the room without her doing anything at all. She was young, barely older than the protagonist, who was just beginning his journey in the galaxy. Yet there was something about her that made her seem ancient, wise beyond her years. Her skin was a deep shade of bluish-purple, smooth and shimmering under the lights of the spaceport. It wasn't the usual pale skin or the greenish tint that many aliens had. No, hers was unique. It glowed softly, like a star that had just been born. Her hair was long and platinum blonde, flowing around her like a curtain of light. It wasn't like the hair humans had. It was more ethereal, with a soft shine that made it look as if it were made of liquid silver. She wore a simple, elegant dress. It was a deep, dark purple that matched the color of her skin, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change with her movements. There were no flashy ornaments or loud colors. Her beauty wasn't in her clothing or her accessories, but in her very being. And yet, despite her elegance and beauty, she was alone. The spaceport was filled with travelers, merchants, and officials, yet no one dared approach her. In fact, they did the opposite. Whenever someone seemed to be getting too close to her, they would abruptly change direction, as if an invisible wall had appeared between them and the girl. It was as though everyone knew something about her that the protagonist didn't. Curious, the protagonist watched from his seat across the room. He was a young traveler just starting his journey across the galaxy. His ship had docked only an hour ago, and he was waiting for a connecting flight to another planet. It wasn't the first time he'd seen an alien of her kind, but it was the first time he'd seen one sitting so peacefully in a spaceport, untouched by the crowds around her. Most aliens were loud, colorful, and bold. They didn't hide their presence. They were often seen with other creatures or shouting out offers for their goods. But not her. She sat quietly, her posture straight but relaxed, her eyes looking straight ahead as if she were waiting for something or someone. She didn't seem to mind the lack of attention, but the protagonist could feel it. There was something powerful about her, something that made people hesitate before getting too close. As the minutes passed, more people walked past the girl, each one giving her a wide berth. The protagonist noticed that no one even glanced at her directly. Some would stop for a brief moment, as if they wanted to speak to her, but would quickly look away, almost ashamed. It was as though they were afraid of her, or perhaps afraid of what she represented. The protagonist's curiosity grew with each passing minute. Why was she sitting there alone? Why was everyone so afraid to approach her? He couldn't understand it. He had always been the type of person to go up to someone new, strike up a conversation, and see where it led. He was used to traveling alone and didn't mind meeting new people along the way. But this girl, there was something about her that made him hesitate, too. He watched her for a while longer, but as the terminal began to empty out, he realized that he was running out of time. His connecting flight would board soon, and he wasn't sure when he would have another opportunity to approach her. He stood up, hesitating for only a moment before deciding to make his move. It wasn't like him to wait for things to happen. If he was going to meet this girl, he would have to take action now. He took a deep breath and made his way toward her, weaving through the crowd as he moved closer. The closer he got, the more nervous he felt. It was like he could feel the weight of the unspoken rules around her. People avoided her, and now he was about to break that rule. He reached the spot where the girl was sitting. The bench was empty, and she still hadn't moved. Her eyes were closed, as though she were lost in thought. She didn't even notice him standing there, though she was very much aware of his presence. Something in the air seemed to shift when he came close to her, as though an invisible force surrounded her, one that could sense his every move. The protagonist stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He had expected this encounter to be different, more dramatic. But now that he was here, standing in front of her, he felt a sudden sense of hesitation. He had no idea what to say to her or how to start a conversation. But in that moment, something inside him told him not to speak at all. He could see the empty seat beside her, and without thinking, he sat down next to her. The action felt so simple, yet so significant. He didn't know why he did it. It wasn't like him to sit next to someone without saying anything, but something about her made him feel calm, almost at peace. He didn't need to speak. He just needed to be there beside her in that quiet moment. The alien girl didn't acknowledge him. She didn't even look at him. She simply sat there, her presence filling the space around them. The protagonist sat quietly for a while, unsure of what to do next. He wasn't sure if he was waiting for her to speak or for something else to happen. But in that moment, all he could do was sit beside her and wait. The crowd around them seemed to fade away, and the spaceport, once so full of noise and movement, felt distant. It was just the two of them now, sitting quietly in the midst of the chaos. It was as though they were in their own world, separated from everything else. And for the first time in a long while, the protagonist felt at peace. But as the minutes ticked by, something strange began to happen. People in the spaceport, who had been avoiding the girl, began to take notice of the two of them sitting together. They started to glance over, their eyes wide with curiosity. Whispers spread through the crowd, and the tension that had been hanging in the air seemed to grow. It was clear now that something had changed. The unspoken rule had been broken, and no one knew what the consequences would be. And in that moment, the protagonist knew that his simple act of sitting beside her had set something in motion. What had started as a quiet, peaceful moment had now become something much bigger than he had ever imagined. As the minutes passed, the protagonist sat beside the alien girl, his heart racing slightly with anticipation, though he tried his best to hide it. His thoughts were a whirlwind, but he couldn't help but feel that something important had just shifted. The spaceport, once so busy and full of noise, seemed distant now. All around him, travelers rushed by, merchants advertised their goods, and the usual chatter of spaceport life continued, but the two of them were separate from it all. Their quiet corner felt like a small oasis in the midst of chaos. He glanced at the girl, noticing the way her long platinum hair shimmered as it caught the light from above. It was beautiful in a way that made it look almost unreal. She didn't look at him, nor did she seem to mind his presence. Her focus was elsewhere, or perhaps nowhere at all, as if her mind was lost in a deep, quiet thought. The air around her seemed charged with something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't magic, but it felt like a quiet power, something that went beyond just her appearance. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that felt comfortable, not awkward, and it settled between them like a peaceful stillness that neither was eager to break. The protagonist didn't feel the usual pressure to make small talk or fill the empty space with words. Something about her presence made him feel as though silence wasn't just accepted, it was expected. But still, his curiosity gnawed at him. He had to know more about her. His eyes wandered around the spaceport as people hurried past, barely noticing the pair sitting quietly together. Most of the travelers seemed too busy with their own plans to care about the alien girl. They had seen her before, perhaps, another mysterious alien traveler on a planet full of strange faces. But not him. He couldn't look away. Despite the calm between them, he noticed the stares from a few of the people in the terminal. Some travelers shot quick glances at the girl, their eyes lingering just a little too long before they quickly turned away, avoiding her presence. There was an obvious tension in the air, as though something unspoken lingered, something that kept everyone at a distance. The protagonist didn't understand it. Why was she so alone? Why was everyone avoiding her? She was beautiful, no, more than beautiful. She was captivating, but it wasn't just her beauty that held the spaceport at bay. It was something more. He shifted in his seat, feeling a strange sense of discomfort. It wasn't a discomfort born of fear, but of a growing realization that the girl was more than she seemed. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but something about her presence felt different from anything he had ever experienced before. His eyes traced her features again, her smooth, shimmering skin that almost seemed to glow, her delicate features that were otherworldly, yet somehow familiar. The more he looked at her, the more he felt like he was in the presence of someone far older and wiser than she appeared. It was as though her age wasn't determined by the number of years she had lived, but by the quiet strength that radiated from her. She carried herself with a calm dignity, and though her face remained impassive, there was an air of authority around her that made him feel small in comparison. He swallowed, trying to focus. The silence between them was peaceful, but it was also starting to make him anxious. Was he supposed to say something? Should he just sit there and wait for her to speak? He wasn't sure how long he could stand the quiet before the need to break it became unbearable. But before he could say a word, she shifted slightly. It was a small movement, but it was enough to catch his attention. The girl's eyes slowly opened, and for the first time she looked directly at him. Her eyes were large, dark, and gleaming with a glassy, reflective quality that made his heart skip a beat. They were beautiful eyes, but not in the way he expected. They didn't sparkle with excitement or joy. Instead, they seemed to hold a deep knowledge, a quiet understanding of things far beyond anything he could comprehend. She said nothing at first. Her gaze seemed to pierce through him, as though she was seeing something in him that he hadn't even realized was there. For a moment, the world around them disappeared. There was just the two of them, locked in an unspoken connection that neither of them fully understood. It wasn't a romantic connection, nor was it one of fear. It was something more complex, something ancient and timeless. It was as if, in that brief moment, she was seeing something in him that no one else had ever noticed. He could feel her presence pressing down on him, making him feel both incredibly small and impossibly important at the same time. And then, without a word, she looked away. Her gaze shifted back to the spaceport in front of them as though nothing had happened. But to the protagonist, everything had changed. He could feel a shift in the air, a change that left him with more questions than answers. Why had she looked at him? What was she thinking? Why had she chosen to sit beside him out of all the people in the terminal? He couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at him, the weight of her gaze still heavy on his mind. He couldn't understand it. What did she want from him? Or was she simply waiting for something? He wanted to speak, to ask her what was going on in her mind, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he possibly say that would make sense? What would make her speak to him? He wasn't even sure if she would. She seemed so distant, so quiet, as if she existed in a world all her own. But then, to his surprise, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost musical, and the words felt like they were carried on the wind. They weren't rushed or harsh. They were slow, deliberate, and as calm as the silence that had surrounded them. "You're not like the others," she said, her gaze never leaving the view outside the terminal window. Her voice sent a shiver down his spine. The simple words held so much weight, so much meaning. What did she mean? What made him different from everyone else? "I don't understand," he said, finally finding his voice. His words felt strange, as if they didn't belong in the quiet space they had created together. She turned her head slightly, enough for him to catch the edge of her expression, though her face remained neutral. There was something in the way she looked at him now, something almost curious. As if she was trying to understand him just as much as he was trying to understand her. "It's not about understanding," she said softly. "It's about feeling. You're the only one here who didn't run away." The words struck him like a sudden realization, and for the first time he understood the weight of what she was saying. He wasn't the only one who had noticed her, but he was the only one who hadn't been afraid. He hadn't turned away when the rest of the crowd did. He hadn't been repelled by her presence. Instead, he had chosen to sit beside her, to be near her, without fear or hesitation. And in that moment, the protagonist realized that his simple act of sitting beside her had already started something. It was more than just sharing a seat. It was an unspoken connection, one that could not be broken. The girl had recognized it, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, she had accepted him. The silence between them stretched on, but now it felt different. There was a sense of understanding in the air. Neither of them needed to speak. They simply sat there, together in the quiet of the spaceport, as the rest of the world continued on around them, unaware of the small, quiet moment that had just passed between two strangers. As the hours passed, the protagonist found himself still sitting next to the girl. The quiet between them had become almost comfortable, though the weight of their unspoken connection lingered heavily in the air. It wasn't as if he felt uncomfortable, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was happening, something he didn't fully understand yet. He had already made his decision to sit beside her, But now that they were together, he realized that this moment was only the beginning. He glanced around the spaceport again. The usual noise and movement were still there, but it felt distant, almost like he was in a different world. He had always been a traveler, moving from one planet to another, meeting new people along the way. But this moment, sitting beside this alien girl, was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The people around them moved like shadows, going about their business, unaware of the significance of what was happening in this corner of the terminal. He turned his attention back to the girl. She hadn't moved much since they sat together. Her eyes remained distant, unfocused, as if she were looking at something far beyond the walls of the spaceport. It was a strange look, one that suggested she wasn't just sitting there, but rather observing the world in a way no one else could. He wondered what was going on inside her mind. Was she just passing time, waiting for something? Or was she sensing something that he couldn't feel? He was drawn to her not just by her beauty, but by the way she seemed to exist in her own quiet world. There was a strength in her silence, a power that made people uncomfortable, yet at the same time, it made him feel safe, like she was someone you could trust without question. But at the same time, he knew that there was something he didn't know about her, something that made her different from anyone he had ever met. Suddenly, he felt a shift in the air. It wasn't dramatic or noticeable in any obvious way, but he could feel it, like a ripple running through the very fabric of the spaceport. He wasn't sure if it was because of the girl or something else, but it felt like a quiet warning, something telling him that things were about to change. He looked around again, his eyes scanning the terminal. Everything seemed normal, but something felt off. The girl beside him, sensing the change, finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Do you know why they fear me?" she asked, her eyes still fixed on the spaceport window. The question wasn't directed at him as much as it was to the air around them, but the protagonist felt it in his bones. She wasn't just talking about the people in the spaceport. She was talking about something bigger, something that had to do with her, and the way the universe seemed to react to her presence. The question hung in the air for a moment, and the protagonist wasn't sure how to respond. He had no idea why they feared her. To him, she was just a person, albeit one from another world, but there was something in the way she spoke that made him think she wasn't talking about fear in the usual sense. She wasn't referring to physical fear, the kind that made people back away from danger. No, there was something more subtle at play here, something that made people avoid her, not out of direct danger, but out of something they couldn't understand. "I don't know," he said, his voice quieter than he intended, "but I don't think anyone should be afraid of you." She turned her head to look at him, and for the first time, her gaze met his directly. There was no warmth in her expression, but there was something in the way she looked at him that made him feel like she was seeing him in a way that no one else had. It was as if she could read his thoughts, see through the walls he had built around himself. For a brief moment he felt exposed, as if she could see every doubt, every fear, and every secret he had ever kept hidden. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not about what they see with their eyes, it's about what they feel." Her words were cryptic, but they made something inside him stir. He didn't know what she meant, but he knew it was important. He had always believed that people's fear was based on what they saw or understood. If something was dangerous, people feared it. If something was unfamiliar, people feared it. But she was telling him that fear wasn't just about what was visible. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. He wanted to ask her more, to learn what she meant, but before he could speak, the air in the spaceport shifted again. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in the atmosphere, but it quickly grew more intense. People around them started to notice. Some paused in their tracks, their gazes drifting towards the girl. Others began to gather in small groups, whispering to each other. The tension in the terminal was palpable. Something was happening. The protagonist felt it in his bones. He stood up slowly, his instincts telling him that it was time to leave. But the girl remained seated, her expression unchanged. It was as though she was waiting for something, something that only she could sense. He didn't know what it was, but he felt the urgency growing inside him. "Come on," he said, his voice tinged with panic. "We need to go, something's wrong." The girl didn't move. She simply looked at him, her eyes soft but unyielding. "There is nowhere to run," she said quietly. "This is where it begins." The words sent a shiver down his spine. He didn't understand what she meant, but he knew she was right. Something was happening, and it was bigger than anything he had ever experienced. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The girl's calm demeanor only made the growing tension around them more unsettling. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even concerned. She was waiting for something, and the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that he was a part of whatever was about to happen. The crowd around them began to stir. Some people were leaving, but others were frozen, staring at the girl with wide eyes. The tension was reaching its peak. It was as though the spaceport was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, without warning, a loud crash echoed through the terminal. The noise was deafening, and the crowd erupted into chaos. People screamed, scattering in every direction, running for the exits. The protagonist's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment he was frozen in place, unable to move. He looked at the girl beside him, who was still calm, still waiting. She didn't flinch, didn't even look at the source of the noise. She was waiting for something else. He didn't know what it was, but in that moment he realized that whatever had started in this spaceport, it wasn't something that could be stopped. There was no turning back now. The girl had known it all along, and she had been waiting for him to catch up. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with purpose. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't ready for whatever was happening, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't run anymore. He nodded. It was the only answer he could give. Together they stood up, stepping into the chaos that was unfolding around them. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. And in that moment he understood something deep inside. He wasn't just a traveler anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something that would change everything. The chaos around them intensified as the sounds of running footsteps and frantic shouts filled the spaceport. People were scrambling in every direction, some heading towards the exits, others huddling together in fear, unsure of what had just happened. It was as if the very atmosphere had changed, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on everyone. But despite the turmoil, the alien girl remained calm, unfazed by the pandemonium that surrounded her. She stood tall, her gaze steady, unwavering. The protagonist, on the other hand, felt a surge of panic rising within him. His heart raced and his thoughts scattered. What had caused the crash? Why were people fleeing? Was this something to do with her? He had no answers, just a growing sense of dread. But as he looked at the girl beside him, something inside him told him that she was different. She wasn't scared. She was in control. "Stay close," she said, her voice calm and steady amidst the rising chaos. The words weren't a command, but a gentle assurance, as though she was trying to guide him through the storm. He didn't hesitate. His feet moved automatically, following her lead as she navigated through the crowd with ease. The people around them, though panicked and confused, seemed to instinctively part as she moved. It was as if they recognized her, or perhaps it was the silent force she carried with her, making everyone step aside without a second thought. The protagonist couldn't help but feel a sense of awe, though it was mixed with a growing unease. This girl, who had once seemed like just another traveler, was now something entirely different. She was like no one he had ever met before. Her calmness in the face of such danger was beyond anything he had experienced. And yet, despite the strangeness of it all, he felt a strange sense of comfort just by being near her. They moved through the terminal, avoiding the panicked crowds. The girl didn't seem to rush, didn't seem to feel the urgency that was evident in everyone around them. She was walking at a steady pace, as though she knew exactly where she was going. The protagonist followed, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she had been waiting for this moment. As they passed through the crowded hallways, the protagonist stole a glance at her. Her face was calm, almost detached, as though she were watching the world around her from a distance. Her eyes, those deep, luminous eyes, remained focused on the path ahead, but there was a quiet intensity to them, a hint of something he couldn't quite understand. It was as if she knew something he didn't, something important, something that could change everything. He wanted to ask her what was happening, what she knew, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't sure if she would answer, and even if she did, would he even understand? He wasn't from her world. He wasn't part of whatever was unfolding in front of them. But somehow he felt connected to it, to her. They reached a narrow corridor, far from the main terminals. The noise from the crowd grew fainter as they moved deeper into the less traveled part of the spaceport. The protagonist's heart was still pounding in his chest, but the girl seemed unaffected. She stopped in front of a plain, unmarked door and turned to face him. "This way," she said, her voice still calm, but now there was something else in it, a sense of finality. As if they were about to step into something irreversible, he didn't question her. At this point, he felt as though he had no choice but to follow. The moment he stepped through the door, he could feel the change in the air. The space behind it was far different from the bustling terminal they had just left. It was quieter, almost eerily so. The room was dimly lit, with only a few lights overhead casting faint glows across the walls. The door slid shut behind them, and the silence felt even more profound. The protagonist looked around, his eyes adjusting to the low light. There were no windows here, no signs of any activity, just empty space, cold metal walls, and a strange feeling of isolation. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice a little shaky despite his best efforts to remain calm. The girl didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the center of the room and placed a hand on a console embedded in the floor. A soft hum filled the room as the console lit up, glowing with an unfamiliar energy. The protagonist's eyes widened. The technology was far beyond anything he had seen before. It looked almost alien, far more advanced than anything in the spaceport. "We are where it begins," she said, her voice low, almost as if speaking to herself. She didn't turn to face him, but he could feel the weight of her words. Whatever was happening, it was about to unfold here in this quiet, hidden room. "Begins?" The protagonist felt a knot form in his stomach. "Begins what?" The girl finally turned to look at him, and for the first time since they had met, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, not warmth, but something deeper. Something that made him feel like a part of a much bigger picture. "Everything," she said simply. "This is where your journey starts and where mine ends." He stared at her, confusion flooding his mind. What did she mean by that, and why did her words feel so final? Was this some kind of goodbye? Before he could ask any more questions, the console beneath her hand flickered to life. A holographic display appeared, floating above the surface, showing a series of planets, stars, and galaxies. The protagonist took a step closer, his curiosity getting the best of him. The hologram was unlike anything he had seen before. It wasn't just a map. It was a living, breathing representation of the universe, constantly shifting, changing, and moving. "This is the galaxy," she said, her voice now filled with a quiet strength. "And this is where it all connects." He didn't understand. He wasn't even sure what he was looking at. The hologram was too complex, too detailed. But there was one thing that stood out, a small dot in the farthest corner of the map. It was so distant that it seemed almost invisible. "What is that?" he asked, pointing to the dot. She looked at him, her eyes focused, as though the question had been expected. "That's where I'm from, my home." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had always known that she wasn't from his world, but hearing her speak about it made it feel more real, more tangible. She was from a distant place, a place that he could never reach, a place that was part of something much bigger than his simple life as a traveler. "Why are we here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are we supposed to do now?" The girl's gaze softened just a little. She took a deep breath, as if gathering the weight of something heavy, something important. "It's not just about you," she said slowly. "This is bigger than anything you can imagine. It's about the future of the galaxy, the balance between all the worlds, and I'm here because I need your help." His heart skipped a beat. Help? What could he possibly offer? He was just a traveler, someone who had wandered from place to place, never staying too long, never being a part of something. He didn't have the strength or the power to fight for a galaxy, and certainly not for an alien girl who was so far beyond him in every way. She took a step toward him, her eyes unwavering. "You have more inside you than you know. The universe works in ways you cannot understand yet, and sometimes it brings people together for a reason." The protagonist swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. He was just a traveler, nothing special. But now, it seemed like he was about to be a part of something far larger than he could ever have imagined. Whatever it was, he was already too deep into it to turn back now. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with purpose. He didn't answer immediately. His heart was still racing, his mind still trying to process everything that had happened so far. But in that moment, he knew that there was no turning back. Whatever was coming next, he had already chosen his path. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady, though his insides churned with uncertainty. "I'm ready." And with those words, they both stepped forward into the unknown, into a new chapter that neither of them could predict. The protagonist could feel the weight of the girl's words pressing down on him as they stood in the silent room. He wasn't sure what was about to happen, but there was no turning back now. The energy in the room had shifted again. It was heavier, filled with a sense of purpose that neither of them could ignore. The girl's calm demeanor, her quiet power, had made him feel like he was part of something important, something much bigger than he had ever imagined. She motioned toward the holographic display again, her fingers hovering over the glowing map of the galaxy. "This is where we start," she said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Everything that happens from here on out will shape the future of countless worlds, including yours." The protagonist swallowed, his throat dry. He had always considered himself a wanderer, never really connected to any one place or purpose. He traveled because it was easy, because it was what he knew. But now, standing in this strange room with an alien girl who seemed to know things he couldn't even begin to understand, he realized that he had just been thrown into something far beyond anything he could have prepared for. "Why me?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "I'm just a traveler. I'm not important. I don't have any special skills. What could I possibly do to help?" The girl turned to face him, her expression softening for the first time since they had met. There was no pity in her gaze, just understanding. "It's not about skills," she said. "It's about what you represent. Every journey starts with a single step, and you've already taken it. That's why you're here." He stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. They didn't seem to answer his question. He wasn't important, not in the way she seemed to think. He was just a young man from a distant world, looking for something to make his life meaningful. And now, he found himself standing at the edge of something that could change everything. "You've been chosen," she said, almost as if reading his thoughts. "The galaxy is at a crossroads. Forces are rising, ones that could tear everything apart. The universe is fragile. You, just by being here, are a part of this fragile balance." The words felt heavy in his chest, and the weight of them seemed to settle over him like a thick fog. He had never thought of himself as anything important. He was just one person, living in a vast universe filled with countless others. But now, with her standing beside him, the girl from another world, he felt like he had somehow become part of something far bigger than himself. He turned to her, confusion still clouding his thoughts. "What do you need me to do?" Her gaze was steady, unwavering. "You will help me stop the coming darkness. It is already spreading, hidden in the corners of the galaxy, unseen by most, but it is growing. The balance is tipping, and we are the ones who must stop it." The protagonist's mind raced. Darkness? What was she talking about? He had never heard of any force that could threaten the galaxy, never encountered anything that seemed as dangerous as she was describing. All he had ever known were the people he met on his travels, the places he visited. He had never been a part of anything like this. "But how?" he asked, his voice shaky. "How do we fight something we can't see?" The girl stepped closer to him, her presence as commanding as ever. "We don't fight it with weapons," she said. "We fight it with knowledge, with understanding." The darkness feeds on fear, on division. It grows stronger the more the universe is torn apart. Our job is to bring people together, to unite the galaxies against it. Her words struck a chord deep within him. He had always been a wanderer, moving from place to place, never staying in one spot for too long. But now, standing here with her, he understood that his journey wasn't just about seeing the galaxy. It was about something much bigger. It was about protecting the galaxy, preserving the balance, and ensuring that the darkness didn't swallow it all. "You want me to help you unite the galaxy?" he asked, a sense of disbelief rising in his chest. "Yes," she said. "Together, we will be the catalyst for change. But it won't be easy. There will be obstacles, and there will be those who resist. Some will fear what we are trying to do, but others will understand, and we will find them." The protagonist took a deep breath, his heart still pounding in his chest. It seemed impossible. How could he, just one person, help her change the course of the galaxy? But there was something in her voice, something in the way she spoke, that made him believe in what she was saying. She wasn't asking him to do this alone. They would do it together, and that was a thought that made him feel less alone, less out of place. "I'll help you," he said, his voice steady, though his mind was still reeling. "But I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do this." The girl nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "The first step is always the hardest," she said. "But you've already taken it. Now we move forward, and we will find others who are willing to join us." She motioned toward the holographic display once more, and the map of the galaxy shimmered before them. "This is where it begins," she said, "but it is also where it ends." The protagonist looked at the map, his eyes tracing the lines and dots, the galaxies and stars, so far away yet so close in this moment. The girl's words echoed in his mind. This wasn't just about one world or one place. It was about everything. It was about the entire galaxy, about bringing together the forces that could fight the darkness. For the first time in his life, the protagonist felt like he was part of something real, something that mattered. He wasn't just a traveler anymore. He had a purpose. And whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited them, he would face them with her by his side. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly, his voice filled with a sense of resolve. The girl looked at him, and for the first time there was a glimmer of something like hope in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there, a sign that maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference. Together they would fight against the darkness. Together they would unite the galaxy. And as they stood there, the room filled with the faint hum of the console, the air around them seemed to change. The weight of their shared mission settled between them, and the uncertainty that had once clouded his thoughts began to clear. There was no turning back now. The path ahead was uncertain, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready. They weren't just a traveler and an alien girl anymore. They were something more, partners in a fight for the galaxy's future. And in that moment, as the lights of the holographic display flickered around them, the protagonist understood that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But he would face it with strength, with courage, and with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. Together, they would change the galaxy.